Welcome to Radio US. Donald Trump's time in office was marked by a series of controversies, with his outspoken and often divisive rhetoric leaving lasting imprints on the political landscape of the United States. From the very beginning, Trump's statements were at odds with traditional presidential decorum. His willingness to openly attack political adversaries, dismiss the media, and use highly charged language made it clear that he intended to reshape American politics in a way that would benefit his political agenda. His approach to governance was unconventional, and his statements at various Trump news conference events exemplified the combative style that became synonymous with his presidency. These moments, filled with unfiltered comments, often triggered harsh reflections from political analysts, the public, and his opponents. Critics quickly pointed out that his rhetoric was not only harmful to the nation's political climate, but also set a dangerous precedent for how future leaders could interact with the public and the media. Trump's statements about various social issues, including immigration, race relations, and healthcare, consistently sparked outrage and led to fierce criticisms from both sides of the political spectrum. One of the most contentious issues during Trump's presidency was his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump's downplaying of the virus, especially in the early stages, led to widespread concern. His remarks during numerous Trump news conference appearances, where he suggested that the virus was being overblown by the media or would just disappear on its own, drew harsh reactions from public health officials and political commentators. Critics argued that Trump's failure to take the pandemic seriously contributed to the high death toll in the United States. His public handling of the crisis seemed more focused on projecting strength and downplaying the severity of the situation rather than addressing the actual challenges posed by the virus. The contradictions in his statements regarding COVID-19 only deepened the distrust many Americans had toward his leadership. During his presidency, he often took a dismissive stance toward the recommendations of health experts, which led to a fragmented response to the pandemic. By the time the virus had become a major issue, many felt that Trump's refusal to listen to experts had already contributed to the widespread confusion and suffering. Trump's handling of foreign policy also elicited harsh reactions, particularly in regard to his relationship with Russia and his approach to NATO. His statements during Trump news conference appearances, where he downplayed Russia's interference in the 2016 election or called for a more amicable relationship with Vladimir Putin, raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. Critics saw his behavior as undermining American interests and emboldening a foreign adversary. His rhetoric often seemed to prioritize personal diplomacy over national security interests, which many found deeply troubling. Trump's comments about NATO and the European Union also caused concern, particularly his repeated criticism of NATO allies for not meeting defense spending targets. While some of his supporters may have viewed these statements as efforts to put America first and push other nations to bear more of the financial burden, critics saw it as an attack on vital international partnerships. The fallout from these comments highlighted the potential dangers of isolating the United States from its allies and disregarding the significance of long-standing international agreements. The issue of race relations under Trump's presidency further fueled the fire of harsh criticisms. His response to the events in Charlottesville, Virginia, in 2017, where white nationalist groups clashed with counter-protesters, was one of the most glaring examples of his rhetoric being at odds with public expectations. Trump's statement that there were very fine people on both sides was widely condemned as an endorsement of racism and extremism. Critics of the president argued that his words emboldened white supremacist groups and sent a message of indifference toward the struggles of marginalized communities. This controversial statement, along with his overall handling of race relations, led to widespread protests and calls for greater accountability. The racial tensions that Trump seemed to exacerbate through his rhetoric only deepened the divide in the country, and the fallout from his comments on Charlottesville was a reminder of how harmful rhetoric could have far-reaching consequences. At Trump news conference events, he would often double down on controversial remarks, further alienating communities of color and inflaming an already volatile political climate. One of the most significant moments that furthered the backlash against Trump's rhetoric came during the 2020 presidential election. Trump's refusal to concede defeat and his repeated claims of widespread voter fraud, despite a lack of evidence, undermined public trust in the electoral process. His false accusations of a rigged election continued to dominate the national conversation long after the election results had been certified. His rhetoric surrounding the election culminated in the January 6, 2021, Capitol insurrection, an event that shocked the nation and the world. In the aftermath of the riot, Trump's statements at Trump news conference were filled with deflection, as he continued to push baseless claims of election fraud while simultaneously downplaying the violence that had unfolded. The insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol were motivated in part by Trump's rhetoric, and many saw his refusal to accept the legitimate results of the election as a direct incitement to violence. The attacks on the Capitol led to widespread condemnation, and Trump's rhetoric was seen by many as a clear example of how harmful words could lead to real-world consequences. The fallout from this event further exposed the dangers of a leader who was willing to disregard democratic norms in favor of promoting a personal narrative. In addition to the specific events mentioned above, Trump's overall approach to governance, one characterized by extreme polarization, an unwillingness to engage in constructive dialogue, and the prioritization of personal interests over public good, led to widespread dissatisfaction among many Americans. During his presidency, and even after leaving office, Trump's remarks continued to draw reactions from all corners of society. The Trump news conference became a spectacle for many, as the former president continued to make inflammatory statements about the current administration, his political opponents, and the media. His ability to command attention, even after his presidency, was a testament to the lasting impact of his rhetoric. However, this constant stream of provocative statements did little to heal the wounds that had been inflicted during his time in office. Instead, it served as a reminder of the divisiveness that defined his presidency and the continued harm that his words could cause. The harsh reflections on Trump's statements are a testament to the profound impact that political leaders can have on a nation. His rhetoric, often characterized by exaggeration, deflection, and distortion, was a central feature of his time in office and remains a defining characteristic of his political persona. For those who disagreed with his policies and statements, Trump's words were seen as a constant source of frustration and anger. His willingness to disregard established norms and speak in a manner that was often unprofessional or misleading contributed to a deepening political divide in the United States. Even after leaving office, the legacy of Trump's rhetoric continues to influence American politics, with his supporters continuing to rally behind him, while his critics argue that his words have had a lasting and damaging effect on the nation. In conclusion, the harsh reflections on Trump's statements reflect the enduring power of rhetoric in shaping the political landscape. From his early days in office to his post-presidency, Trump's words have sparked fierce debates, protests, and a re-evaluation of what it means to lead a country. The Trump news conference moments, filled with controversial statements and inflammatory rhetoric, are emblematic of his approach to governance, one that prioritized divisiveness over unity. As the country continues to grapple with the legacy of his presidency, it is clear that the consequences of his rhetoric will be felt for years to come. Whether seen as a champion of conservative values or as a threat to democratic institutions, Trump's words remain a central part of the political conversation in the United States.